Want a defense that's solid, flexible, and frustrates attackers? Meet Caro-Kann, your new secret weapon in chess. In just 5 minutes, we'll break down the key ideas and basics so you can start playing it with confidence. Let's dive in. The main line of the Caro-Kann defense starts with pawn e4, pawn c6, pawn d4, pawn d5, knight c3, pawn takes e4, and knight takes e4, leading to the classical variation. Here, black develops the light-squared bishop early with bishop f5, aiming for active piece play before closing the center with pawn e6. White often responds with knight g3, attacking the bishop, which usually retreats to g6. This is followed by pawn h4 and pawn h6, stopping white from trapping the bishop. White might then continue with knight f3, while black develops with knight d7. If white pushes pawn h5, black calmly moves the bishop back to h7, allowing white to exchange bishops with bishop d3, bishop takes d3, and queen takes d3. Black then plays pawn e6, solidifying the structure and preparing further development. This setup creates a balanced position where white has kingside space and attacking chances, while black stays solid and looks for counterplay. Very popular line is the advanced variation of Caro-Kann. That begins if after d5, white pushes the pawn to e5. Black now has two main options. One is pushing pawn to c5 straight away, the Botvinnik-Karls defense. If black takes the pawn, you play e6. White might try to hold on to that pawn with b4, which you reply with a5. If white plays c3, you take on b4, and after recapture, you strike with b6. Black can't take the pawn because the bishop takes on b4 with check, so he will play some other passive move, and you will capture the pawn back. White might also decide not to take the pawn and play more passively with knight f3, for example. You play knight f6, and after moves like c3, you play bishop g4. Your plan should be to try to pressure the center with moves like c takes d4, trying to bring your knight to f5 and castle eventually. If you are not feeling like pushing a pawn straight away at the start, you can also play bishop f5 and e6. You have to be careful, though, because after bishop f5, white might strike with h4, and if you don't play h5, your bishop will be trapped. But in other situations, after moves like knight f3, you will play e6, and after that prepare for c5 again. The difference in this variation is that you developed your bishop to f5, and it isn't blocked by the e-pawn as it is in the previous variation. But you have to be careful about the bishop and eventually play moves like h6 so the bishop has a safe square. The last variation is the exchange variation. This is the most passive variation of Caro-Kann. It usually leads to symmetrical games with standard development and often ends in a draw. After d5, white captures on d5 and you recapture. After that, you try to develop your pieces with moves like knight c6, knight f6, and bishop g4. Your plan in the middle game is to castle and maybe start an attack on the queen side. In this trap from the advanced variation, white advances with e5, gaining more space, while black develops the bishop to f5 before it gets locked behind the pawn structure. White immediately challenges the bishop with bd3, and black decides to trade, capturing on d3. White recaptures with the queen, and black solidifies the center with e6. White then develops the knight to e2, likely aiming to reposition it or support the center, while black immediately counters with c5, striking at white's center. White reinforces with c3, and black develops the knight to e7, preparing to reposition it to more active squares. At this point, white plays queen b5 check, seeing the opportunity to take the unguarded pawn on c5. If white then gets greedy and captures on c5, thinking it is a free pawn, black immediately punishes this by playing knight f5, which unleashes a discovered attack from the bishop on f8 to c5, directly attacking the white queen. White, realizing the danger, tries to escape by moving queen to a5, but black seals the trap with b6. Now the white queen is completely trapped, with no squares left to move, and white is lost. This trap is not that popular, but it is easy to remember and very fun when it works out. White follows the main line with e4 and d4, while black challenges the center with c6 and d5. White decides to play the classical variation with knight c3, and after exchanges in the center, white develops the knight to g3, and you launch an aggressive h5, aiming to expand on the king side. White mistakenly plays bishop g5, trying to damage your pawn structure by taking the knight, but you don't care and push pawn to h4. White then blunders with bishop takes f6, thinking it wins material, but instead falls into a devastating trap. You take the knight, and now black has to retreat the bishop to e4. You take on h2 with the rook, and black recaptures. Now comes the fun part. You play queen a5 check, and then you sacrifice the queen by taking the bishop on e5. That allows you to take the rook and make a new queen. This trap punishes careless exchanges and showcases how black's precise tactical play can lead to an early queen in a winning position. The Caro-Kann defense is a solid and flexible opening that helps black develop safely while preparing counterplay. Key ideas include activating the light-squared bishop early, maintaining a strong pawn structure, and using well-timed pawn breaks to challenge white's position. Patience, good piece coordination, and awareness of tactical traps make it a powerful choice for players of all levels.